Welcome to the second video in Beetlegust 2024. In the last video, I planned out Juno's office and I built the first walls. In this video, I'm going to continue building so that hopefully the backdrop, everything that's going to be around the furniture and the dolls, is complete. I've pretty much left the project on my desk and just continued to work from where I left off. It's very handy to have this desk and to have the base have a flat top on the top, so it's like having two desks, one for my project and one on top of my project so I can continue to work. I've got my to-do list, I've got my supplies, so let's go ahead and finish up working on Juno's walls. This is where I left off in the last video. I had created all 5 columns and filled in between the columns with removable walls that have windows inside of them. I did create 2 permanent walls which have the door and then a blank wall. I also left these 2 side areas open. The side on the right is going to contain a speaker box and the side on the left is going to create an exterior scene that also needs to be closed in. So there's still quite a bit of building that needs to be done. I'm starting with the step down that goes from the door down into Juno's office. I'm using a double layer of foam board and just carefully marking out where I need to cut so that it perfectly fits against my wonky walls. I'm going to make this a double step. I glued those in place and added a 1, 2, 3 block on top. Now it's time to add in the speaker. Off camera, I cut these walls to be the perfect size to go around the speaker, and it also fits perfectly between the base wall and the column I created in the previous video. This was really satisfying that the speaker fit perfectly in this space. I initially added wood glue to the edges when I first put the walls in place, and now I'm going to go around the edges to enforce it with hot glue on the exterior. I'm using the tip of the hot glue to make sure it's very flat against the wall. The speaker box is something that I designed and 3D printed, and I want to make sure that it's not just glued to the foam board wall, but also down to the plywood base so that it's very secure. This eventually will hold the speaker that hopefully will play the Beetlejuice soundtrack as the rest of the project moves with the lights going on and off. I decided to shave down the corner of this wall because it looked too angular and too sharp with the rest of my design, so I just covered that with a little bit of wood glue so it's reinforced and not just bare foam. Now that I have the speaker wall glued in place, I'm going to take out all of the removable walls and use some lightweight spackling to fill in any remaining gaps. This may be around the base of the column, the top of the column, and in between any permanent walls that are staying in place. Here is a photo of the product that I am using, but really any drywall spackling will work. I just really like this lightweight spackling. I'm also using this along the edge of the stairs. It's going to make it look like it's more built into the wall and like it's all one original piece. While the spackling is drying, I'm going to start working on what I am calling cave columns. You can see these very clearly outside of Juno's office, and they make it look like this entire space is underground. I'm going to be putting a couple of these in the left side view outside of Juno's window, which is why I have left it open so far. I temporarily put the wall back in place so I could trace it out while looking through the window to know that you will be able to see the columns once the wall is permanently glued in. I used a dowel for the one that's going near the speaker wall, but for the ones that are going against this back wall, I'm just going to be using plain aluminum foil. This can be glued straight onto the plywood wall and hopefully give me a lot of depth to this space. I'm using hot glue at first to glue it in place, but I will be later securing it even more with some drywall spackling, just the same stuff that I used on the stairs and to fill in any gaps in the walls. I'm building up the shape that I see in the movie reference, and I have a total of 2 columns that you can see through the window view. I use the same aluminum foil technique on the other side near the speaker, except I just glued it straight to the dowel instead of to the wall. This is going to make it a bit removed from the wall and I think give it a bit more of a 3D effect. When I did my toy shop collab with Whitney Labrie, I learned this technique of adding the lightweight spackling straight onto the aluminum foil and allowing it to dry. I made several big mushrooms this way, and so I've decided to do the same thing here. However, this time I won't have to make it as smooth because this is supposed to look really lumpy and bumpy. I'm using a plastic bag with a hole in one corner, kind of like a piping bag, to apply it at first, and then I'm using a brush with some water on it to smooth it out and make sure it gets into all the crevices. This will totally ruin a brush, so if you try this technique, make sure it's not a brush that you like very much. Here are my final cave column locations, and I'm just going to let all of this dry. Now that the walls are finished up, it is time to add some color, and by color I mean gray and black. I somehow forgot to record the part where I painted the background black, but these are going to be any parts of the walls that are beyond Juno's office. All of her actual office walls are going to be painted this pewter gray, and I am going to be putting a texture on it eventually, but I need to do a base coat first. So if my texture coat comes out a little thin, there is color behind it and you won't see the white foam board through it. I'm going to be covering everything in this gray. I'm even going to be painting the floor, even though I have a different plan for the floor, but I really just do like to do a base coat over everything. And this is going to take a few coats to cover up the foam board. So I'm just taking my time and making sure I get all of the nooks and crannies, especially those that are associated with the cave columns, because those came out very bumpy, which I really do like the texture. It just takes some time to make sure I get it covered completely. I thought I was done painting, but then I remembered I had pulled out my removable walls and I needed to paint those gray as well. So these were a bit more tricky and honestly a lot more annoying than the previous part that I painted because I had to paint all of these individual slats. Once they were finished, I could put them back in place. I wanted to put them in place to make sure that everything still fit, that nothing warped and there weren't any problems with the walls fitting in between the columns. I let everything dry overnight, and then it was time to permanently finish up the paint job on the cave columns. I need to close up this area behind this window, so I need to make sure that I'm happy with their look before that is done. I'm adding a mixture of black paint, a darker gray, and then also a lighter gray and some white to pull out the shadows and really give some contrast so that you can see the lumps and bumps I created with the aluminum foil and spackling. This is really a process of going back and forth with my paintbrush until I'm happy with the look. There's no really set technique, it's just going with my paint until I'm happy. Once I felt good about the shadows, I went in with some dry brushing to highlight the ridges of all of the wrinkles, and then I went back over it with some of my base coat of gray just to merge it all together, and I think it came out pretty well. I did the same thing on the columns that are in the window space. It's just easier to show you on the one column by the speaker wall because it's not inset into the project. Once that was complete, I could finally close off the left side wall. I will still be able to access this area from the removable wall, but I knew it was going to be so much easier to sculpt the columns and paint them before this side of the wall was permanently closed up. I added some foam board. It wasn't the right size, so I added in an extra little strip of foam board, and I'm going to use my lightweight spackling to cover that up so you can't really notice that I didn't cut it the right size. I'm going to do this on all sides so that it looks like a very smooth transition between the wall, the columns, and the base. Now I can paint my gray base coat and blend it in with the rest of the project. Since all the walls are now in place and complete, I can add my texture, which consists of sand, some PVA glue, and the base coat color I just painted all over everything. I'm mixing that together as kind of a 1:1:1 ratio. However, I do end up adding a bit more sand just because I do want it to be a bit more grainy. And I do suggest if you try this that you keep mixing up your paint mixture over and over again because the sand will settle towards the bottom and you'll get an uneven coat. I'm adding this texture mixture over every single wall and column except for the cave columns. Those are not going to be textured. Even though I am doing this with the removable walls in place, I'm being very careful to only paint the surface of the walls and not get any in the cracks to accidentally glue those removable walls in place. I do not want that to happen because I still need to get back there to add lights and wiring in the future. While all of that is drying, I can now turn my attention to creating a door that will fill in that empty space in the center. Thankfully, I kept the cutout from the door opening, so it's going to make it easy to create the door knowing that it will fit inside the hole. I grabbed this door from the waiting room. I want to make it very similar because these are the same areas essentially. However, I'm going to make the handles on the opposite side, so it does look like it's an interior door versus an exterior door on the waiting room. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's just what I decided to do in my head. I'm first starting by creating the frame of the door, and this is just going to be glued together on top of the cutout so that I know I'm getting all of the angles correct. I am just making it slightly smaller than the cutout so I know it will fit inside. I added an extra piece for where the handle is going to go and then created the handle out of paper, which is what I think I did the last time. Then the entire thing can be painted with a base coat of gray that matches the walls. The gray is a bit different from the waiting room, but I'm okay with that. Actually, each space, the gray is just slightly different. I'm using the same type of Worbla that I did on the other door. I still had some from the very same sheet. I did not look up my video on how I did this, so I struggled a bit at the beginning. I used a piece of corrugated cardboard that I tore the paper off of one side. And essentially how Worbla works is you warm it up. It's plastic that you warm up and then you can form it to whatever shape you want. Well, every time I warmed it up, it was so sticky, it kept sticking to the wood dowel that I was using to push it in place. So I added some wax paper on top and that worked so much better. I could push it down into the corrugation without worrying that it was going to get stuck to my dowel. And it did, as you can see, stick to the wax paper, but it was pretty easy to get off with some focus. I let it cool off completely so it hardened into shape, and then I could remove it from my cardboard corrugation. This took a little bit of effort because of course it was stuck down, and there is some cardboard on the back, but no one will see that, so I'm not too concerned. But now that the texture is correct and complete, I can trace my door opening on top of this piece and then cut it to fit. And don't worry about the Worbla scraps. They all go into a scrap bag and can be reused later for little details here and there. So now I can push it into place so that it fits in my door frame, and then I just add a layer of hot glue on the back side, which is going to hold it in place. And now my door is complete. And if all worked well, it should fit perfectly in the door frame that is in my back wall. And it does. However, if I push too hard, it will fall through the back wall. So I'm going to be using some jumbo popsicle sticks that I cut into pieces to keep it from doing so. And just like the door that I made for the waiting room, I also plan to add a magnet so that it is removable and I can get to the wires and lights behind it. I added a pin nail to the back of the door frame, so once I glue the magnet just inside the door opening, the door should fit perfectly and then hold itself in place unless I need to get back there for some reason. Because the door is just slightly smaller than the hole, I can see the color from the popsicle sticks and the magnet behind it. So I'm going to take some black paint and paint over those areas. This way, when the door is in place, they don't really stick out. The window to the left of the door eventually will be covered by drapes completely, and I want to have light shining through the fabric. I am hoping by adding some mirror paper behind the window opening, it will help the light bounce around a little bit better in this very narrow space and will ultimately help the light shine through the fabric. The backing on this mirror paper is pretty sticky, so I'm not adding any glue, but if I do see any signs of it trying to fall off or come off of the wall, I will add glue later on. So for now, you are going to see a bit of a reflection, but that will be covered up later. In the last video, I showed you this vinyl paper that I had purchased specifically for the floor of Juno's office. And so now I actually get to try it out and see how I like it. I'm going to start out with a glue test. I have a control that's just stuck straight onto the cardboard without any glue, and then I used some Fabrifix glue because I thought that was going to be the best glue to use. The vinyl does not stick very well by itself, or it's just very removable. And honestly, it was still pretty removable with the Fabrifix. So I did a third test off screen, which was the wood glue, and this stuck so much better. I had a hard time pulling it off of the cardboard, and when I did, some of the cardboard came off on the back of the vinyl, meaning that this glue was sticking so much better than the other options. So I'm going to be using wood glue all over the floor to make sure that the vinyl stays in place permanently. Instead of trying to make one giant floor sticker that is going to stick perfectly the first time, I am going to piece this floor together by using little bits of the vinyl. First, I'm going to go all the way around the border of the room, going around the columns, and slightly into the spaces that have removable walls. This is going to help me get a really good fit. Plus, I think it will add to the industrial feel of the room if the floor looks like it was pieced together by different sheets of metal that were found around the netherworld. My process for laying down each piece was to cut the size that I felt like I needed. I put it down with the sticker still on the back, traced it with a pencil to make sure I knew where I needed to add my glue. Then I added the wood glue and spread it out with just a scrap piece of mat board. Then I could take the sticker off of the back of the vinyl and put it into its final place. After I went around the edges with smaller pieces of vinyl, I was able to fill in the center with larger and larger pieces. I tried to make sure that the pattern that was showing was going in different directions so that the light hit it in all different sorts of ways, and it definitely looked like different sheets of metal. I'm sorry that everything's a little blown out or super bright in this part of the video. My camera really didn't know how to handle the really dark back walls and then my hand being close to the camera at times. So it's going to be a little bright here and there. This is what the floor is looking like so far. I am really liking it, but I do feel like it does need some help with aging, which we will get to in a bit. But first, I have decided to cover the ceiling with the same exact material. And this is why the glue test was so important, because now it's going to be fighting gravity. My standing desk is going to act a bit like one of those scissor lifts you find in a car garage. My neck really appreciated this so I could see what I was doing, but after a while my arms really started to complain. However, I did get the ceiling finished in just the same steps as I did the floor, and I'm really happy with the results. We are now in one of my favorite stages, as most of you know who watch my videos, and that is aging. I need to make sure Juno's office looks like it has been around for centuries, maybe even millennia. Collecting dirt, collecting grime, dust. So I'm going to be using a mixture of acrylic paints, both brown and black, to do my initial aging. I like to age things as I go along, but there will be a final aging at the end once everything's in place to make sure everything looks like it goes together. The first step to this process is going to be to add a bit of brown around all the edges of metal. This is going to make it look more like a purposeful decision that I made it out of a bunch of different scraps. And I always love when you can bring more interest to a floor or ceiling, especially when it takes up such a large space. I'm tapping the brown acrylic paint down with my paintbrush first, and then I'm just using my finger to fuzz it out a little bit. In order to make everything look cohesive, I'm going to add some of that same brown paint onto my gray walls. This is going to make it look like it's been aging all together. So the same dust, the same dirt and grime has been building up, not just on the floor, but on the walls as well. I also added in some black acrylic paint, not as much as the brown. I just added it here and there. So you will see that on some of the very corners of the metal sheeting. The black paint also helped with the transition between some of the vinyl sheeting and other parts of the project. Now that the aging is complete, we can work on a few accessories to go in the office. Now these are going to be really fun because so far we've just been working on walls, floor, ceiling. I'm going to be making a few details to make this look more like a room that's used, such as some wiring and drapes for the windows. In the reference, there are some windows that have drapes and some that don't. I'm going to use this to my advantage to have some windows be open and some of them closed off. Of course, we know it's closed off because there's nothing really back there, but it helps the illusion that there is more space behind Juno's office. It's hard to see what the drapes really look like and if it's just a bunch of shadow or if there's a pattern, so I'm going to go with a plain fabric and just allow the shadows to do their work, hopefully, once the lights are installed. These are the two walls that need drapes applied to the windows. Thankfully, because they're removable, it's really easy to pull them to the top of my desk so that I can measure and make sure I have it correct. I'm going to use the scariest tool in my collection, which is a rotary cutter, to cut my fabric, which is just a plain beige fabric with nothing on it. I'm doing a very simple hem on the bottom of the drapes by just going along with some hot glue and folding over the bottom edge. Then I can cut them to size to make sure they are the right length for each window. I actually made them a little too long, which will come in handy as you will see coming up. This larger window is going to have two skinny panels on each side and then one short panel that goes across the top. This will make sense when you see me put it all together. But this way the window still has drapes, but it is open so you can see what is past it. In order to create the permanent wrinkles, I am mixing some PVA glue and water, and I can take my hemmed fabric and dip it into my glue water mixture. I have a piece of cardboard set up with a piece of wax paper on top, and this is so I can lay out my drapes and hold them in place with pins while they dry. I'm going to get as much water out as I can before I start this process. But once it's on top of the wax paper, I'm going to use some sewing pins to pin each wrinkle in place. This way it stays where I put it while it dries. You can be very exact with this method and make sure that you have beautifully draped drapery. However, I am being pretty messy because the drapes in my reference look fairly messy and like they haven't been taken care of very well. So I'm just having fun with it. I wanted to add some aging while they were drying because I felt if they were already soaked with water, the paint would spread out along the drapes, and I ended up not liking this aging process. I added some more drops and drips, and then I mixed a darker brown because I really couldn't see it, and this is where I started to not like what I was doing, but I was hoping by the time it dried, I would like it. Unfortunately, by the time it dried, I still did not like it because the fabric dried a lighter color and it just looked like polka dots or something. It did not look right to me. And this was kind of a bummer because it takes a while to put these together and sit there and let them dry. So I really did not want to do this over again. But when I started pulling them off the wax paper, I noticed that when I turned the drapes over, I liked how they looked on the back rather than the front. So I'll show you the difference. This was the front. It just looked not right to me. But the back was a little bit more naturally aged. However, the drapes looked a little bit weird and the hem was now on the wrong side. So I had to make a decision on if I was going to make them over again or if I was going to try and save the pieces that I already created. So what I did was cut off the bottom hem, and then I was hoping I could fix the top of it by forcing it to fold over this thin stick that would essentially become my curtain rod. I cut it to be the same exact width as the wall, so I knew that it was the right length across, and then I added hot glue to the stick and added my drapes to it so it would look like it was draped over the top. This would hide my hem and allow me to continue to use this fabric without having to redo it. Once the glue was applied, I tried to keep it as even as possible, making sure that it touched the glue to where all of the wrinkles laid evenly as possible. I allowed that to dry and then added some more glue to the back of this stick and then folded it over so that it was as flat as possible. It's okay if it sticks out a little bit from the window, but I don't want it to stick out too much. At times I did have to remove a little bit of the folded over fabric because it had hot glue on it and was getting kind of thick, but overall I am happy with how it is looking. I also wanted to make sure that light would shine through it. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, there's supposed to be light behind this window, kind of hinting that there's something outside this office, and I'm pretty happy with the results. I'm following the same steps for this other window. This is the one that has the two thin side panels on each side and the shorter one in the center. I'm using a thin stick just like I did before, and I'm gluing the side panels on first to make sure I like how they look. And then to make sure that I get this shorter panel centered, I am adding the glue in the center of the stick first, and then pressing down the center of the panel, slowly adding more glue, trying to make sure that it's all lined up evenly. You may notice I did leave the bottom hem on this piece. It was already a bit too short, so I didn't want to cut off too much and it be just weird looking. So I left that hem. I don't think it sticks out too bad. But this is the final result of those drapes, and I do like how they look, so I'm pretty happy that I decided to just keep going forward and not remake the drapes. Here's how they look once they're put in place. I decided to go with the beige fabric because I have the beige color from the Warbler in the door. I think it works okay, and it adds to the drabness that you're supposed to feel in Juno's office. Now that that's done, we're going to focus on this blank wall over to the right. It just needs a little something. And what would be a better addition to a drab office space than a boring bulletin board with a bunch of boring flyers? I'm going to create this bulletin board with a piece of card and some stick-on cork board that I had in my collection. I think I probably should have made this board a little bit smaller. It does end up being kind of big, but there's more room for flyers that way, I guess. I glued the cork board down to some cardstock, framed it with some wooden sticks, and then used a sharp blade to cut it all out. I decided to paint the frame with the same paint that I was using to age the rest of the office, so hopefully it blends in really nice. And then that was pretty much it for creating the corkboard, a really fast and easy project. While that was doing a final dry, I found some typical office flyers you might find on a bulletin board, and then I printed a ton of flyers that you might find from a certain someone who's looking to cause some problems. I did a tiny bit of aging to the corkboard, but really you aren't going to see much of it, and then cut out all the flyers. I thought this one was really funny because it said free positive thoughts, which is kind of a funny thing to put into the netherworld. I cut off a few to make it seem as though they were taken and glued that down to the board. There's very few of these because they're mostly going to be covered up. I also thought it was funny. I found this one that said, please don't use thumbtacks in the wall, and thought I could use that to my advantage in this project. I glued down all of the what you would call regular flyers. I then got to work putting on the Beetlejuice flyers, which are pretty much going to cover everything. I particularly like this project for being hung right outside Juno's office. I like to think of them kind of in this battle, especially because Juno used to be his employer. I just envision this battle of Beetlejuice putting these flyers up and Juno constantly trying to rip them down fast enough. I want to add some thumbtacks specifically to reference my little sign on the side there. These are some very tiny micro beads that were sent to me by a friend, and I think they're going to be perfect for this part of the project. They are so small. It took little dots of glue from the toothpick, and this is how they look once they're glued down. I put this little arrow of thumbtacks, and this is going to point to right behind the cave column on the side. And I'm going to add some more pieces over there. I glued this in place. As I said, I feel like it's a little big. It could have been just a bit smaller, but I do think it looks okay, and I'm happy with the results. While I'm here, I figured I'd show you what the speaker will look like eventually once it's in place. This is how it fits, but I'm not going to leave it in there for now because there are no screws to hold it in place and I don't want it to fall out. So that's why it's just kind of a gaping square hole in my project for now. I added some more flyers into the wall, specifically with thumbtacks, and I think it's funny that they're behind the cave column because I don't know, maybe it shows that Beetlejuice wants to annoy Juno, but he's also just a little bit afraid of her. So he's doing annoying things, but they're a bit hidden from her immediate view. I also added a few flyers down on the floor, and this is really helping that transition between the vinyl floor and the cave column. So I really like this detail. Juno does have at least one framed painting in her office. It depicts a bridge. It's not this specific painting. I had this one left over from when I worked on the waiting room, but often bridges are a symbol of death and crossing over, so I wanted another bridge painting in her office. I framed it the same way I did the cork board. I used a light wood to go along with the beige color of the drapes. The reflection of my studio lights made it a bit hard to see here, but it does look good in person. I can now move on to another detail I spotted in the reference. It was way back, sitting on one of the columns. It was a light switch with a wire coming out of it. It's bright red with a white switch, so I'm excited to make it. I'm making it out of 3 layers of mat board, and the back layer has a notch cut out, which is the perfect size for the wire that I have. I glued it all together and let it dry, and then I could sand all 4 sides to make sure it's as smooth as possible before painting. To make sure there's a place to add the switch, I'm just making a small rectangular cut in the center and pulling out the mat board layers until it's as deep as I like. I ended up making 2 of these, and I'm going to paint both of them with a bright red to match the wire. And then I cut a very small sliver of white mat board to act as the switch. And I can just glue that straight on. It is not actually going to function. I'm gluing it first to my column, and then I'm going to use an awl to punch a hole at the top of the column. Did you hear that? I said awl correctly. I'm very proud of myself. It is going to be the perfect diameter for the wire. I found it easiest to glue the wire in at the top first. Let it hang down so that it's the correct size to fit into the hole at the top of the switch box, and then I could add glue and add my wire in there as well. Off camera, I bent some Christmas wire into a U shape and pushed that into the wall over the red wire. This is going to secure it in place a little bit better than just trusting it to stick to the wall with the little bit of glue that I had. Then I aged the light switches in place to make sure it looked like they had been sitting against that wall for years. The last project I'm going to do to finish up Juno's office walls is to add my friend Flat Stanley over to the left side. I think it is the perfect size for him. He needs a rail, so I found this piece of metal that's actually supposed to be used to clip large amounts of paper together, and I'm not using it for that purpose. So I think it'll be a good rail for Stanley. In order to install it, I am punching a flat hole into my cardboard column. This is going to allow it to slide into the column and be supported on that side. On the other end, I glued some paper because paper is going to be easier to glue to my project than metal. And then I bent a paper clip into a hook shape, and it fits perfectly on the rail so Stanley can slide back and forth. Once I knew I was ready to get this glued in place, I added glue to both ends and clipped the end with the paper onto my project so it could dry there and be secure. Those are all the projects I have for you for Juno's walls. I think the walls are fairly done, so everything else is either going to be furniture or an accessory or dolls. I do want to add some more paper around Flat Stanley. I know his name's not Flat Stanley, but that's what I just keep calling him. I'm going to have to make a lot of papers around Juno's office, so I will add his papers at that time. But I'm really happy with my bulletin board, I'm happy with the drapes, I'm happy with the floor and the ceiling, and overall just could not be happier with this entire space. So that's all I have for you today for Juno's office build, which is my Beetle Gust project for 2024. I hope you've enjoyed it so far. In the next video, I'm going to be working on some furniture. That's going to be Juno's desk and the chairs that go around it, and I also need to make some filing cabinets. So there's going to be a lot to do. I hope you all have an amazing week. I hope you're having a happy Beetle Gust, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. In preparation of working on the furniture next week, I moved my base back over to its table, and guess who figured out they were tall enough to stand up and get a little dollhouse snack out of the waiting room. So I purchased a tablecloth that I'm going to cover the base with as a precaution to make sure that no one gets snacks, at least from this part of the house. It was pretty easy to clamp it down at the legs. I just hope that the tablecloth is now left alone. I guess we will see.